So I call it the Red Hat way here, but basically, I know how many of you guys actually manage the servers that run like a Rails app on it? Okay, so more than I actually was expecting. Because I know at work we pretty much always use Heroku for everything, and occasionally Engine Yard. But and when you set up that machine, picking the distribution you use to run on it actually does matter a good amount, especially if you're going to have non-developers administrating it and want to minimize their workload and keep everything up to date and secure. So the background on this PowerPoint, or on this keynote, is when I originally, I recommend Red Hat still for deploying web servers, and this was specifically for web servers at GTRI where you're working in a secure environment where you really have to stay up to date, and Red Hat is by far the way to go there. But I also cover some other distros here. So if you have a medium-sized company where you're doing you have customers who know how to use their computers, so developers know how to use their computers, and you want a secure web server environment. So the solution that I have said here is that Red Hat Linux or CentOS is generally the best thing to deploy on for web servers. And it's because it's still GPL like Linux, but it is paid and it does require a subscription. But basically the way I liken that to developers is it's software as a service for your operating system. You're paying Red Hat to take care, you're paying them a one-time license fee to take care of all the updates for your server for about 10 years. And which your hardware is not going to last that long, and you're going to have to reinstall a new operating system. So why do you want to do this? If you're deploying for a corporation and they may not be familiar with Linux, depending on what type of environment they are, but with Red Hat, part of the Red Hat license is they will come to your defense if anybody sues you for patent suits. You get your security updates really fast, like within days at the most. You get up to 10 years of support on your Red Hat installation or your by proxy CentOS, which means you really don't have to worry about upgrading the machine. The hardware is going to die, or your app's going to need redeploying before you have to mess with your OS again. And your drivers get backported, which for Linux people is very helpful. But it's unfortunately not free. If you're at all affiliated with Georgia Tech, you do get free copies of Red Hat. But then also CentOS is pretty much the same thing. It's just rebranded. It's the same software, just different logos, different name, and a different set of, or a second copy of the same repositories. Red Hat itself is just basically a snapshot of the stable version of Fedora. And Fedora is great for development machines because it stays really up to date. They have a new release every 6 months, so it's always the latest versions of things. Key differences if you go Red Hat versus Debian, mainly the package manager and the Red Hat package manager versus the Debian one, and then yum and apt installed packages. And then those are some other things. So Kickstart, Spacewalk, and Anaconda are more for IT purposes. SE Linux, if you're running a Ruby app, unfortunately, I've found you really just have to turn off SE Linux unless you have someone who really knows what they're doing with it, because it's crossing context between Nginx, Passenger, and whatever else you have going on in the machine. So here is the chart I show people when they're trying to choose what they're going to install on their server. Ubuntu is good, especially if you are familiar with Debian. I really would recommend it over Debian because if you're doing Rails and Ruby apps, you need the latest versions of your server software. And Debian also gets end-of-lifed after about 3 years. Fedora is end-of-lifed after 13 months, which is why you should never put it on your web server. But it's great for development because every 6 months you're going to get the newest stuff that is often somewhat broken, but it'll eventually make it into Red Hat. Red Hat is supposed to be released every 2 years, and they will fix any bugs and security issues for 48 months. And then extended end of life, if you have a machine that's up to 10 years old, you can pay them a little extra and you will still get updates for it, which that point, you probably aren't running a Ruby app anymore. We're probably going to be running something else. Kickstart is kind of like Chef or Puppet, but it's more of a one-time run that you run when you install it. It sets up, it's like a Windows installer answer file. It'll put up, it'll create all your user accounts, lists of packages you want to install, your partitioning, any remote servers you need to connect to for authentication. And you can put Flash and Chrome and your whole dev stack on it. And really, you should, Kickstart is great if you're going to be setting up brand new Linux dev machines for people. And then Kickstart to start with, get a nice fast install, and then use Puppet or Chef on top of it to maintain it. So Puppet, it can be loaded from a web server or put on the CD itself. You just, you can, on the bootloader, when you start the install, you can put the URL there. Back keys. Okay. And it will set up your whole machine, including all your user accounts, and take care of all your packages. Okay, Spacewalk is more for your IT people to worry about. It lets them mass manage packages across a bunch of servers and keep them all up to date. You can do this with many solutions. This is Red Hat's official solution. I don't like it that much. It crashes a lot. It's a Java app that takes ridiculous amounts of RAM, and it really doesn't carry its own weight on as far as it's not worth setting up a server for unless you have hundreds of machines, and especially if they're end-user machines that you want to keep up to date. It's a web interface, channels, packages. You can create Kickstarts actually in it and push them out via Spacewalk, but once again, that's when you're talking about hundreds of machines. If you aren't using the straight Red Hat network packages, the official Red Hat packages, so if you're running CentOS, it is a huge pain to import them in, and it has signing issues and things along those lines. It's really just overkill for most things, and small dev shops have no reason to use it. But hey, if you have 50, 60 developers and you want to make sure they're all able to get the latest package versions and force push security updates to them, go for it. So what about Ruby for the Linux stack? What do I recommend, at least, is the easiest to system administrate on a Linux machine? I know I use a Mac for my Ruby development, and I think most people in the room do, because it really handles all this well, and it's pretty painless to get Ruby set up. But once again, if you have more than one machine under your control, you want a nice, consistent, easily updatable methodology. The right way, people say, for software on Red Hat and CentOS and Debian is to always put it in a package, which would be RPM or a Debian package. But I found with Ruby stuff, especially gems, they just don't get updated fast enough. Like, it can be a matter of a month or two before RPM gets released for the software you use, which, if you're working on a Rails app, especially if you're on Rails 4, is hopeless.
Do they have a Ruby 2 gem or Ruby 2 RPM?
I haven't looked.
But maybe not. Right?
Yeah, I
think there is one.
Yeah.
192.
Yeah, I would say always use RVM and just install it as root. That way, all your users on the system have the same Ruby version, at least as an option. They can still install their own RVM in their home directory. But this also, if you're running multiple apps on one server, they'll all share one RVM, so you can keep that up to date. Bundle as usual, just bundle install in your directory. But make sure that you don't use the package manager to install the RPM or the dev of a gem if you're using Bundler. Because depending on how your path is set up, that gem might take precedence over your Bundler installed gem. And sometime you'll find something that will break. And there really is no reason to pull gems out of the repository of your operating system if you were using Bundler. Ruby 2.0 on a production server, when you're, once again, sticking with packages. Right now, it's in there. I have not done it with RPM. I haven't done it with RVM. The problem is passenger, you have to use a beta passenger. I don't know if you still do. This was like 2 months ago. It's, once again, cutting edge, and Linux on packages does not always tend to be cutting edge, especially on Red Hat and CentOS. I prefer Nginx over Apache. It's easier to administrate as far as my personal preference almost. You want to use Nginx's repositories, not the one provided by your operating system, once again to make sure you're getting the latest versions. And I like Passenger too, especially Nginx Passenger. Don't use the gem version, or sorry, use the gem version, don't use the RPM or the package, because once again it updates itself with Bundler and lines up with your Ruby and gem versions. And some things that I still want to look into, or that I would like the enterprise Linux to have, is a good cross-platform NFS, which for developers is less important as engineers. We are sharing files between different operating systems and need a nice write and readable directory for your company. Developers, I mean, most of your app data is in a database, so you don't need to use a file system. And then some more useful Red Hat, mainly software that you can look into if you want to do key management, more RPM packaging, or authentication service. So yeah, just my quick overview of Linux for Ruby apps. Any questions?
Is there an easy way to just use Red Hat with like EC2, the AMIs for?
Yes, and actually, as of like 2 days ago, they lowered the price on the Red Hat EC2 instances to be way more in line with the rest of the Linux nodes.
Oh, so you can just pay like hourly?
Yeah, you pay hourly and you get the Red Hat license with it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gary.